Before I tell you what happened to me, you need to understand one thing. I never expected my life to change on Christmas Eve. I was 23, alone in a city that didn't know my name, working long nights at a bar and going home to an apartment barely holding itself together. Christmas had become a reminder of everything I had lost, not something to celebrate. But that night, someone was watching me. Someone who had noticed me long before I realized it. A man with eyes too cold to be human, a presence too intense to ignore, and a secret powerful enough to pull me into a world I never believed existed. I didn't know it then, but the moment he stopped me on that empty street, my life and my heartbeat were no longer mine alone. What started as fear would become something far more dangerous, something that would reshape my fate, my identity, and every truth I thought I understood. And now, I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories filled with mystery, emotion, and impossible love, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Now, let me take you back to that Christmas Eve. This is where everything truly began. I remember the Christmas lights outside the bar window more vividly than any other decoration I have ever seen. They flickered against the glass as if mocking me, reminding me of everything I had lost and everything I would never have again. For years, I had worked every holiday, every special date, every moment normal people shared with family. I didn't do it for choice. I did it because I had nowhere else to be. My name is Emily Carter, and for 7 long years after the accident that took my parents and my little brother from me, Christmas had been nothing but a reminder of emptiness. Their absence had hollowed out my world, leaving me wandering through life like a ghost of the girl I once was. I had been 17 when the crash happened, and from that moment on, every December felt like reopening the same wound. No warmth, no presents, no dinner table laughter, only the quiet ache of knowing I would walk home alone at the end of my shift, unlock the door of my decaying studio apartment, and heat up a cheap frozen meal while pretending it didn't hurt. The studio wasn't much. The walls were cracked. The air smelled faintly of mold, and the heater rattled so loudly that I often wondered when it would finally give up. I could afford nothing better. Bartending barely paid my bills, and even then, only because I lived in the cheapest building in the roughest corner of Portland. My Christmas dinner was always the same, a microwaved tray of mac and cheese, the only thing I could buy without feeling guilty afterward. But everything changed the year I met him. Before that night, before the night everything in my life diverged into a before and after, he had already caught my attention in small, quiet ways. His presence inside the bar was impossible to ignore. He always sat alone, always perfectly still, with an elegance that didn't belong in a place like ours. His clothes were tailored, his posture impossibly straight, his skin pale in a way no winter wind could justify. The kind of man who looked like he had stepped out of a different century and accidentally wandered into a dim, noisy bar where people spilled beer on the counter. His name was Nathaniel Hale. I didn't know that at first. I only knew the feeling he gave me. The sensation that his eyes followed me even when I wasn't looking at him. Not in a predatory way, not exactly. More like someone studying something rare, something fragile. Sometimes our eyes met while I crossed the room carrying a tray, and for a second too long he didn't look away. He made me nervous, not because he behaved strangely, but because he didn't behave at all. He never laughed, never smiled, never reacted to the noise or the crowd or the drunken disputes. He just watched. Occasionally, when I set his drink on the table, he asked how my night was going. His voice was always low, smooth, deliberately calm, as though he had practiced speaking softly his entire life. I would answer with something short, something polite, because that was all I had time for. But even those tiny exchanges carved a space inside me I didn't fully understand. And then came that Christmas Eve. A night that began like all others, until it stopped being ordinary in a single heartbeat. I had just clocked out. My feet hurt, my back hurt, and all I wanted was to go home and pretend I wasn't spending yet another Christmas alone. I held the supermarket bag with my frozen mac and cheese as I stepped out into the cold. The night air slapped my cheeks immediately. Snow threatened to fall, but the sky held it in a heavy, suffocating stillness. I walked quickly, head down. The streetlights buzzed above me, illuminating the empty sidewalks with a sickly yellow glow. I had made it only 2 blocks when I felt it. The touch that changed everything. A hand on my shoulder, cold as death, cold as a slab of marble pulled from deep underground, cold enough to make my bones jolt. I froze. Fear climbed my spine like a living thing. When I turned, I recognized him instantly. Nathaniel, alone under the flickering streetlight, his pale skin almost glowing, his eyes reflecting a strange shine that made my stomach twist. He told me he had noticed me leaving the bar, that he thought it wasn't safe for me to walk alone, that I looked tired and vulnerable. His words weren't spoken with casual friendliness. They carried an intensity that felt foreign, imposing, almost dangerous. I wanted to step back, but his hand had not left my shoulder yet. The cold seeped through my jacket, through my skin, through everything I thought I understood about human warmth. I tried to calm myself, but the truth was that nothing about him felt normal. I told myself I was imagining things because I didn't want to be scared, because being scared meant acknowledging how alone I truly was. He said he would walk me home. I tried to decline, but he insisted with a tone that left no room for argument. Something in his voice, an authority born from centuries, though I didn't know that then, compelled me to obey. I followed him, partly out of fear, partly out of exhaustion, partly out of that twisted logic that grows inside someone who has already lost everything. When we reached the corner near my building, he suddenly stopped walking. He looked at my grocery bag, at the frozen meal inside, and something in his eyes darkened. He said it wasn't right for me to spend Christmas alone, not after the life I had endured, not after everything fate had taken from me. I tried to tell him that I was used to it, that loneliness had become a part of me, but he didn't accept it. He insisted I spend the night with him. Not asked, insisted. A chill deeper than the winter wind settled into me. I hesitated, thinking of my apartment, ugly, cramped, freezing, but familiar. I thought of my parents and my brother, and how Christmas without them felt unbearable anyway. I thought of my empty life, of how nothing ever changed, of how every day felt like repeating the same painful cycle. And then I thought, what worse could possibly happen to me? It was a dangerous thought, a reckless thought, but I was tired of being afraid of living. So I nodded. He led me into his car, an impossibly sleek black vehicle that looked expensive enough to feed me for a year. My fear grew with every minute of the drive, every curve of the dark road that led farther and farther from the city. When we turned into the long driveway of his estate, and I saw the mansion emerge from the shadows, my breath caught in my throat. It was enormous, surreal. A palace made of stone and silence, the kind of home only old wealth could possess, the kind of home that didn't belong to reality. He took me inside, and the moment the heavy doors closed behind me, I knew I had made a mistake. The interior was dark despite the glowing fireplaces. The ceilings were high, the halls long, and every surface polished to perfection. But there were no sounds, no footsteps, no voices, no staff. He told me the servants had gone home to spend Christmas with their families. And then he added that he didn't intend to let me leave. Not that night, not while he faced the holiday alone. Something inside me screamed. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream for help. I wanted to turn the doorknob behind me and flee back into the cold night, even if it meant walking miles in the dark. But he didn't let me. He didn't touch me. He didn't threaten me. He simply blocked my path with a presence so overwhelmingly dominating that I knew escape would be impossible. Fear consumed me. I was trapped. And Christmas, a night already heavy with grief, had become the most terrifying night of my life. The first moment inside that mansion felt like stepping into a dream I was never meant to enter. Everything around me was too elegant, too immaculate, too cold. The ceilings soared above me with carved wooden beams that looked older than the city itself. The chandeliers cast soft golden light over marble floors polished so clean they reflected me like ghostly fragments. I didn't belong there. Every breath I took felt like an intrusion. Nathaniel led me through a wide hallway, his footsteps silent, while mine echoed like little explosions in the quiet. The way he moved disturbed me. He glided, almost effortlessly, without the subtle clumsiness human bodies naturally possess. I tried to stay calm, but my pulse hammered wildly inside my chest. The air felt too still, too heavy, like the mansion itself was holding its breath. He showed me to a large dining room, but I couldn't bring myself to sit. The table was set for one, a crystal glass, a single plate, a candle flickering in the center. Everything so strangely intimate, yet unsettling. He told me he didn't eat dinner, not at that hour, not on that night. He said he wanted to keep me company while I ate something warm, something better than a frozen mac and cheese. He had prepared the table for me before leaving the house, before ever approaching me outside the bar, as if he had planned to bring me there, as if he had known I would come. Fear tightened around my throat. My instincts screamed that I was in danger, that I should run, that something about him wasn't just mysterious or wealthy or strange. Something about him was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. I forced myself to sit. My legs were shaking. My hands trembled as I touched the silverware. The mansion was too quiet, so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I felt his gaze on me constantly, heavy and intense, making my skin prickle. Part of me wanted to break the silence. Part of me wanted to beg him to drive me home. Part of me wanted to hide. But a larger part of me, the part that had walked through life numb with grief, whispered the same dangerous thought over and over. Nothing worse could possibly happen. Nothing could hurt more than what I've already lost. I know now that grief can distort judgment. It can make reckless things feel rational. It can make danger feel like comfort simply because it feels different from loneliness. When I finished eating, he spoke again, telling me he had something to show me. His voice was calm but carried an ache I didn't understand. In a strange way, it sounded like he was confessing something without words, something I wasn't ready to hear. He led me to a sitting room with a grand fireplace. Flames leapt behind an iron grate, casting shadows on the walls. The furniture was dark, almost gothic, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and old books. He gestured for me to sit on a velvet sofa. I obeyed because disobeying didn't feel like an option. When he sat beside me, the cushion sank only a little, as though his weight was lighter than expected. I felt the cold radiating from him even from a distance. He began talking, not about himself, but about me. He spoke of watching me in the bar for weeks, of noticing how tired I looked, how sad, how alone. He said loneliness had a scent, something soft, raw, and unmistakable, and that mine lingered around me like a fog. He said he recognized it because he carried the same thing within himself. Every word made fear coil tighter inside me. Every word made me feel exposed, as if I had been monitored, studied, chosen. I didn't know how to respond. My voice felt trapped somewhere deep in my chest. I stared at the fire instead of at him, hoping the heat would erase the cold settling into my bones. He told me he didn't want to spend Christmas alone, that every year he dreaded this night more than any other, the quiet, the memories, the emptiness. He said he couldn't face it again, and then he said he needed me there, not wanted, needed. Those words didn't feel romantic. They felt heavy, binding, suffocating. I gathered the little courage I had left and stood from the sofa. I murmured that I should go home, that I was grateful, but I couldn't stay. My body screamed to run, to put distance between myself and him, between myself and that cold mansion. I stepped toward the door. He stepped in front of me. He didn't touch me. He didn't threaten me. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, tall and pale and impossibly still, blocking my way with an expression I couldn't decipher. He told me he couldn't let me leave. I felt my heartbeat slam against my ribs. Panic surged through me so strong I thought I might faint. His presence filled the room like a shadow swallowing the light. I realized then that I had made the worst choice of my life by following him there. I was trapped. My breathing quickened, but he asked me, softly, to sit again. He said he wasn't going to hurt me, that he just wanted company, that the night was too heavy for him to endure alone. I didn't believe him. Not really. But fear froze my legs in place, and I found myself sinking back onto the sofa, helpless and overwhelmed. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, him watching the fire with an expression filled with ancient sorrow, and me watching him with a dread that mixed strangely with curiosity. Despite everything, despite the fear, something about him hurt. Not physically, emotionally, as if he carried centuries of grief inside him. I didn't sleep that night. He didn't either. We sat awake until dawn, trapped in a strange quietness between terror and sympathy. When the sun began rising, he finally allowed me to leave, and I ran. I ran home as fast as I could, heartbeat roaring, lungs burning, tears freezing on my face. I locked the door behind me and slid to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I cried until exhaustion stole my strength, until fear blurred into disbelief, until the memory of his pale eyes followed me even when I closed mine. I told myself I would never see him again. I told myself I would avoid him, ignore him, forget him. But fate, dark, twisted, inevitable, had other plans. Because the next time I walked into the bar for my shift, he was there, sitting in his usual spot, waiting. And when our eyes met, the fear returned, but something else returned too. Something I didn't want to name yet. Something that would change everything that followed. When I stepped into the bar for my next shift, I wasn't expecting to see him again. I had convinced myself he would disappear from my life as mysteriously as he had entered it. I told myself he had gotten whatever he wanted that Christmas Eve, my presence, my fear, my company, and that he would move on now, that he would lose interest, that I was safe. But the moment I walked in, I felt him before I actually saw him, a coldness in the air, a presence that distorted the room around him, a weight in the atmosphere that silenced my heartbeat for half a second. And then my eyes found him, sitting at the same table, in the same chair, exactly as he had been before, elegant, motionless, unreal. His gaze met mine instantly, as though he had been waiting for that exact second. A shiver ran through me so sharp it nearly stopped me mid-step. I wanted to turn around and walk out. I wanted to quit right then and there, abandon the shift, the bar, the entire city if necessary. But I couldn't, because something inside me, something I hated, something I didn't understand, was drawn to him despite everything he had done, despite the fear, despite the danger, despite the fact that he had kept me in his house against my will. My manager told me to take his table. I tried to protest. I said I wasn't feeling well. I said my stomach hurt. My voice sounded shaky even to my own ears. But the bar was full, everyone was busy, and no one cared enough to notice the panic rising in my chest. So I walked toward him. Each step made the air colder. Each step made my memories sharper. Each step reminded me that this was the man who had locked me inside a mansion and refused to let me leave until dawn. But when I reached the table, he spoke softly. My name, just my name, and something inside me cracked. Because the sound wasn't threatening. It wasn't brutal. It wasn't demanding. It was aching. As if he were the one afraid. As if he were the one uncertain whether I would run or stay. I realized then that he wasn't there to intimidate me. He was there because he couldn't stay away. He told me he regretted frightening me that night. He spoke carefully, as though afraid his words might push me away again. He said he never intended to hurt me, only to keep me close on a night that felt unbearable for him. He said he didn't expect me to understand, but he hoped I would eventually forgive him. Hearing him confess that, without arrogance, without entitlement, without the coldness I expected, shook something inside me. It didn't erase the fear, but it complicated it. It tangled it with curiosity, confusion, and a tiny, shameful spark of longing. For the next week, he returned to the bar every night, always sitting in the same place, always watching me quietly. Always waiting until my shift ended. He didn't approach me unless I approached him first. He didn't touch me. He didn't insist on speaking. He simply existed near me, silent, patient, constant. And it terrified me how quickly I grew used to it. Every time I noticed him walk through the door, my heart raced, not just with fear anymore, with something deeper, something dangerous, something warm, something I didn't want to admit was there. I told myself that I only felt drawn to him because he was different, because he was beautiful, because my life was unbearably empty and he was the first person in years who seemed to truly see me. But the truth was harder to accept. I cared. I cared even when I didn't want to. I cared even when I tried not to. The night everything changed came unexpectedly, like most dangerous things do. He waited for me outside the bar after my shift, leaning against the stone wall with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The cold mist of late winter curled around him, but he looked untouched by it, like the air itself didn't dare disturb him. He told me he had a job offer for me. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. He explained that his mansion required hands he trusted, someone who could manage daily tasks while his staff focused on larger responsibilities. He said he wanted to hire me, that he would pay me well, that I wouldn't have to work in the bar anymore, that I deserved better. But there was a condition. I would have to live in the mansion. The words hit me like a blow. Live with him? After what had happened? After he had kept me there against my will? I wanted to refuse immediately. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't insane, that I would never willingly step foot inside that place again. But he looked at me with something that disarmed me entirely. Not coldness, not dominance, but longing. Real longing. Deep, desperate, unspoken. And I thought again of my apartment, the mold, the cold, the loneliness, the ghosts of my family trapped in every silent corner. I thought of myself standing over the microwave every night, heating the same meal, staring at the same peeling paint, feeling the same emptiness. And then I thought of him, the pale, cautious man who sat for hours just to be near me, the quiet presence that made my heart race, the strange warmth blooming inside me despite all the fear. Something whispered inside me that I should say no, but something louder, the part of me that was tired of surviving instead of living, told me to say yes. So I did. I accepted. And when he smiled, just slightly, barely, but enough, I felt a pull inside me, strong enough to drown every fear I had. I moved into the mansion 2 days later, and that was the beginning of a different kind of captivity. One I chose, one I feared, one I craved. A captivity woven not from force, but from longing. A captivity called love. I used to believe that memories softened over time, fading like photographs left too long in the sun. But when I think about those first months living in Nathaniel's mansion, nothing feels faded. Everything is sharp, bright, carved into me with a clarity that almost hurts. Maybe because it was the first time in years that my life felt like it was moving forward, even if I didn't understand where it was taking me. The mornings in that house were unnervingly quiet. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, illuminating furniture that looked older than the entire city. I would wander the hallways with a strange awareness that none of this belonged to me, even though I now lived inside it. And always, I felt him somewhere nearby. It was the way the air changed temperature, the way shadows seemed to thicken when he entered a room. His presence was unmistakable, a cold electricity that brushed over my skin whether or not he spoke to me. Sometimes I heard his footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving through the wooden floors. Those moments made me hold my breath without meaning to. He reminded me often, in his quiet, controlled way, that I was free to roam the house. But it never felt like freedom. It felt like a reminder he needed me to hear, something between a reassurance and a warning, as if I were both a guest and something he wasn't ready to let slip away. And yet, even with the fear, the uncertainty, the constant awareness of him, I found myself watching him too. He had a way of appearing in doorways without a sound, observing me with those strange, shimmering eyes that seemed to hold a sadness older than anything I could imagine. I remember cleaning the grand library one afternoon, pretending to be absorbed in the dusting of shelves just so I wouldn't have to think about how intently he was watching me. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled at the parts of me I had spent years trying to keep numb. I kept telling myself that the tension I felt around him was just fear, that the tightness in my chest was a warning I should listen to, not a feeling I should explore. But as days turned into weeks, the truth grew harder to ignore. I wasn't just afraid of him. I was afraid of myself, of the way my heart reacted to him, of the way loneliness made me vulnerable, of the way I leaned into the attention he gave me even when it terrified me. I tried to keep my distance, to speak only when necessary, to carry out the tasks he assigned without lingering. But there were moments that cracked my resolve. There were nights when he would pass through the hallway on the way to his study, and I would catch the faintest scent of something cool and unfamiliar, like winter air and old stone. There were mornings when I'd find fresh flowers placed silently near my workspace, though no gardener had been hired and he denied arranging them. There were times when he stood too close, when I felt the chill of his body seep through my clothes, and my skin reacted with a confusing mix of adrenaline and longing. I told myself over and over that it was wrong, that he was wrong for me, that I should never want someone who had frightened me the way he did that first night. But want doesn't ask for permission. It slips in quietly, soft as breath, until it fills every corner of your mind. The night everything changed was one I remember with excruciating clarity. I had been rearranging the shelves in the parlor, trying to fix a crooked stack of books, when he came up behind me. I knew he was there before I turned. I felt the cold first, followed by that strange awareness in my spine. When I faced him, he was watching me the way someone watches a candle burning itself down, with fascination, with restraint, with something dangerously close to regret. He stepped closer, so slowly it felt intentional, as if giving me the chance to flee if I chose to. But I didn't move. I couldn't. There was a pull between us, a tension stretched so tightly that if either of us breathed too deeply, it might snap. I remember thinking that if he touched me in that moment, really touched me, there would be no going back. I would be lost to him, and he would be lost to me. And then, as if realizing the same thing, he stepped away. He left the room without a word, but the echo of that moment clung to me for days. My heart wouldn't let me forget the way he had looked at me, as if he wanted something he believed he shouldn't have, as if I were dangerous to him in a way that defied logic. That was when I knew. This wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't loneliness twisting itself into something else. I was falling for him, and it terrified me more than that freezing Christmas Eve ever had. The days that followed that almost touch were the most agonizing of my life. I moved through the mansion with the careful precision of someone trying not to disturb a sleeping beast, even though I knew he never slept. Not in the way humans did. I felt him everywhere, behind doors, at the ends of corridors, lingering in rooms moments before I entered them. A presence that wrapped around me like cold fog, seeping into the cracks of who I used to be. And yet, I kept catching myself waiting for him, waiting for a glimpse of his pale figure standing at the balcony overlooking the gardens, waiting for the sound of his measured steps echoing through the quiet halls, waiting for the brief, charged moment when our eyes met and something unspoken flickered between us. I hated how much power he had over me. I hated how much I wanted him to look at me the way he had in the parlor. I hated that part of me hoped he had stepped away that night, not because he didn't want me, but because he did. I told myself it was foolish, dangerous, reckless. But longing has a way of stripping logic from the bones. It was during one of those lonely evenings, when the sky outside had turned a deep purple and the mansion was quiet as death, that everything shifted again. I had gone to the back gardens to clear my head, brushing dead leaves from the stone pathway. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but I stayed there, trying to breathe, trying to steady the whirlwind inside me. When I felt him behind me, I didn't have to turn. My body knew him by fear and by desire. My breath caught, and for a moment, neither of us moved. I could feel the cold radiating from him like an aura, chilling the night air. He approached slowly, with that deliberate grace that always made me wonder whether he was holding back some darker instinct. He stood close enough that I could feel his presence at my back, but not close enough to touch me, not close enough to break whatever fragile control he had on himself. I remember thinking that if I turned around, I would lose something. Maybe myself. But I turned anyway. His expression was unreadable, carved from moonlight and centuries. But his eyes told a story he couldn't speak aloud. Longing, restraint, hunger, and something that resembled fear. Not fear of me, fear for me, fear because of me. That realization hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. He was resisting something, something that had nothing to do with cruelty or control, something that felt achingly close to tenderness. I whispered inside my mind that he was dangerous, that I should walk away, that I had survived too much, lost too much, to fall into the hands of someone who lived in shadows. But instead of stepping back, I held his gaze. I didn't move. I didn't look away. My heart was beating so hard it felt painful. I could swear he heard it. He always heard everything. He reached out a hand, slowly, as if moving through water. But he stopped just inches from my face, his fingers hovering near my jaw without touching. The cold radiating off his skin brushed against me like a whisper, and it was enough to steal the air from my lungs. That was the closest we had ever been. The world felt suspended, breathless, waiting for something to break. But again, he pulled back. He turned and walked away with the same suddenness as before, disappearing into the shadows of the mansion as if he had never been there at all. I stayed in the garden long after, replaying the moment again and again until the cold seeped into my bones. I told myself I should be relieved. He had kept his distance. He had given me an escape. But instead, all I felt was the echo of what almost happened, a longing that curled tight around my ribs, refusing to let go. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the small bedroom he had given me, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long we could continue like this, circling each other like two forces bound by gravity, waiting for the moment we would collide. It happened sooner than I expected, and when it did, nothing about my life remained the same. I didn't realize how fragile the balance between us had become until the night it finally broke. It was late, later than I usually stayed awake. The mansion felt unusually heavy, as if the walls themselves sensed something shifting. I had been reorganizing one of the linen closets on the second floor, mostly just to distract myself from the sound of my own heartbeat. Ever since that moment in the garden, it was as though the silence had grown louder, as though every second was charged with an energy I couldn't name. I closed the closet door and was halfway down the hallway when I felt that familiar chill roll over my skin. He was near. I didn't see him at first. I just felt the air change, drop, tighten, sharpen. My breath escaped in a trembling exhale, and when I looked up, I found him standing at the far end of the corridor, half-shadowed by the glow of the sconces. He didn't move. He just watched me. His eyes were glowing faintly, the way they sometimes did when the light hit them just right, or when something inside him was slipping. I should have turned back. I should have lowered my gaze, slipped away, pretended I didn't feel drawn to him like a thread being pulled from a frayed edge, but I didn't. I stepped toward him, one slow step, then another. His expression didn't change, but the air around him did, thickening, trembling, as though he were fighting something invisible. I felt it too, a tension building between us, stretching tight like a piece of string pulled to its limit. When I reached the middle of the hallway, he finally moved. Not quickly, never quickly. Just one step. A single step that closed a distance I hadn't realized was so dangerous. By the time I recognized the breathlessness rising inside me, it was too late. He was already close enough for me to see the faint tremor in his hand before he clenched it, close enough for me to see the faint, unnatural glow in his irises, close enough to hear the quietest hitch of his breath, a rare sign of shaken control. I wasn't imagining it. He was struggling, not with me, with himself. And knowing I was the reason his restraint was cracking made something inside me unravel in a way that terrified me. He lifted a hand, slowly, as if fighting every inch of the movement. His fingers hovered near my cheek, cold enough that the air between us felt icy. He whispered my name. No. He said my name, but I heard it as memory, not sound, not dialogue, a soft, broken way of saying it, like he knew touching me would ruin us both. That name, my name, felt like a confession coming from him. His fingers brushed my jaw, just barely. A touch so light it almost wasn't a touch at all, but it was enough. My breath caught violently, and I felt my entire body tilt toward him, drawn by a force I could neither fight nor understand. Every part of me was trembling, fear, desire, anticipation, confusion, woven into something intoxicating. And then he leaned in, not fully, not decisively, just enough for me to feel the ghost of his breath against my mouth. My pulse was so loud I could swear it echoed through the hallway. For a fraction of a second, I thought he'd finally given in. I thought he'd closed the last inch between us. I thought he'd let himself want me the way I wanted him. But instead, he pulled back. So sharply I flinched, his expression twisted, not with anger, but with anguish. A pain so deep it flashed across his face like a shadow passing over the sun. He stepped away from me as though my existence burned. I reached for him instinctively. Not with my hand, but with my heart, with the helpless plea rising inside me. But he retreated faster than I'd ever seen him move. One instant he was in front of me. The next, he had vanished into the darker stretch of hallway, swallowed whole by shadows that seemed to welcome him home. And I stood there alone, shaking, my lips tingling with the imprint of a kiss that hadn't happened. Something fundamental had changed. I could feel it in the air, in the hollow space he left behind, in the restless ache curling inside my chest. We couldn't go back to whatever we had been before that moment. A line had been crossed, not by touch, but by everything he'd almost allowed himself to feel. The next time he came close to me, I knew neither of us would be able to stop it, and the thought both terrified and thrilled me. I didn't see him for 2 days. 2 days in which the mansion felt emptier than ever, its long corridors colder, heavier, as though the absence of his presence left a void too large for something human to fill. I tried to distract myself with chores, routines, lists, anything that kept my mind from replaying the moment in the hallway. But it replayed anyway. The breath between us, the trembling in his fingers, the almost kiss that burned more than any touch ever had. By the third night, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. I went to the greenhouse to water the night-blooming flowers he tended, mostly because I couldn't bear the thought of them wilting in the silence. The moonlight pouring through the glass gave the plants a silver glow, soft and eerie. I moved slowly, letting the quiet steady me, but the air felt strange, too cold, too still. I didn't hear him enter. I just felt it. A shift, a presence behind me, a pull deep in my chest that answered his without permission. When I turned, he was already there. He stood just a few steps away, but it felt like inches, like the distance between us had been collapsing all along, until this moment forced it into nothing. His expression wasn't calm. It wasn't detached. It was raw, almost haunted, like he'd been fighting storms I couldn't see. For a moment, neither of us moved. I didn't breathe. Then he stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. Each step tightened something inside me until it hurt in a way I didn't want to escape from. The moonlight hit his face just enough for me to see the tension in his jaw, the faint tremble at the corner of his mouth. He stopped in front of me, close enough for our breaths to mingle in the cold air. He lifted a hand. This time, there was no hesitation. His fingers brushed my cheek, and the chill of his touch seeped into my skin, into my bones, into everything I was. I leaned into him without meaning to, drawn by something older and deeper than reason. He looked at me then, really looked, as though he'd been trying not to for far too long. Something inside him broke. I felt it, a shift, a surrender, a quiet collapse. His hand slid behind my neck, cold and gentle, and before I could think, before I could breathe, he pulled me to him. The kiss wasn't soft, it wasn't tentative, it was desperate. A rush of cold and fire all at once, a claiming and a confession tangled into one impossible moment. His lips were cold against mine, but the heat that tore through me was unbearable, overwhelming, consuming. I clutched his coat, grounding myself against the intensity of him, the darkness of him, the truth he could no longer hide. The world around us vanished. The greenhouse, the moonlight, the silence, all swallowed by the breaking point we had both been spiraling toward. He deepened the kiss as though he'd stopped resisting entirely, as though the restraint he'd clung to for so long had finally snapped. I felt the tremor in his hands, the hunger buried in his restraint, the storm he'd been holding back. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't simply desire he feared losing control over. It was everything. When he finally tore himself away, the break was violent. His breath hitched, his chest rising and falling in a way that made him look almost human. But the glow in his eyes, that was not human at all. The realization settled into me with cold clarity. He stepped back, every movement pained, not because he regretted the kiss, but because of what it revealed. His lips parted slightly, as though he was about to speak, or confess something he'd kept buried for far too long. A shadow crossed his face, an ancient, heavy anguish. He whispered, not a word I could hear, but a truth that trembled in the air between us. And then he looked away, his jaw clenched, his posture rigid, torn between staying and fleeing. Darkness gathered at the edges of the greenhouse, shadows stretching unnaturally, answering him like loyal, silent companions. I took a step forward. He took a step back. Another inch, another retreat, until the shadows swallowed him completely. He was gone, and I was left standing in the moonlit greenhouse with the taste of cold fire on my lips, my heart pounding with the weight of a kiss that changed everything. I finally understood what he had been hiding, what he was, and I knew. Nothing between us would ever be the same again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his cold lips on mine again. That impossible pull, that dangerous hunger, that quiet devastation in the moment he disappeared into the shadows. I lay awake replaying it all, wondering whether I had imagined the inhuman glow in his eyes, the way the darkness reacted to him, the way he moved like something not entirely bound by the rules of the living. But no matter how I tried to twist it, soften it, rationalize it, the truth pressed in around me from every angle. I had kissed a man who wasn't human, and yet, I wanted him still. That was the part that frightened me more than anything else. The next morning, the mansion felt heavier, as though it were holding its breath. I carried a tray downstairs, telling myself he wouldn't be there, that I wouldn't run into him, that he would stay hidden in whatever dark place he had vanished into the night before. But I was wrong. He stood at the far end of the dining hall, staring out the tall windows, his back to me. His posture was different, stiffer, guarded, as though he were bracing himself. The cold morning light outlined him like a shadow carved into the room. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the tray so tightly my fingers ached. He knew I was there. I felt it in the air, but he didn't move. I thought about turning around, pretending I hadn't seen him, but something deeper pulled me forward. Not courage, not recklessness. Something quieter, something that felt like truth. I stepped closer. He finally turned his head. When our eyes met, a shiver ran through me. There was no warmth in his gaze, but there was something else, something fierce, wounded, and unbearably lonely. His lips parted slightly, as though he were about to speak, but instead he drew a slow, heavy breath. I sensed his restraint before he even opened his mouth. I understood in that moment that he wanted distance, not because he regretted the kiss, but because he feared where it might lead. I told myself I should step back, give him space, pretend nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Pretending would have been more unnatural than breathing underwater. I moved closer. His eyes darkened, not with desire, but with fear. Not fear of me, but fear for me. He took a single step back, and the movement was so fast, so inhumanly smooth, that my breath caught. He was trying to hide it, but he couldn't. Not after the shadows I saw the night before. Cold certainty settled over me. He was not a man. Not in the way I had always understood. Something older. Something darker. Something cursed. Before I could speak, he broke the tension with a quiet, fractured admission that he didn't trust himself around me, that he was dangerous, that what happened last night should never have happened. He said it in a way that felt like he was tearing something out of himself. He looked at me as though the kiss had ruined him. I felt my heart twist with something sharp and foolish, something that made no sense except for the fact that my soul had already begun to anchor itself to him. I wanted to tell him I wasn't afraid, that I wasn't leaving, that he could try to push me away but it wouldn't change anything. But I just stood there, watching the storm in his eyes. He forced himself to look away, another step back, another breath of restraint shaking his chest. Then he left the room. Not vanishing, not disappearing into darkness, just walking away, the human way, as though fighting the pull made him weaker than giving into it. Days passed like this, brief glimpses of him, cold distance, silent rooms full of everything we weren't saying. And yet, each night, I felt the echo of his presence somewhere in the house, watching, guarding, struggling. The tension between us became a living thing, thick and breathless, like the moment before a storm breaks open. I started to sense when he was near even before I saw him, a pull deep in my chest that responded to him the way the tides answer the moon. Sometimes I caught him watching me from the shadows of the hallway, his eyes glowing faintly before he turned away, disappearing without a sound. Other times I felt him behind me in a room, close enough to touch, but staying far enough to pretend he wasn't there. The nights grew colder, the mansion darker, and the space between us thinner. He tried so desperately to stay away. But I could feel the truth beneath his restraint. He wanted me, and it terrified him. Talam! The break happened on a night when the wind scratched at the mansion windows like claws, and the candles flickered as though breathing. I woke suddenly, my heart pounding, a cold chill spreading across my skin. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. I sat up, listening. But the house was silent except for the distant groan of old wood shifting under the winter cold. Then I felt it. A presence outside my room. Cold. Still. Unmoving. My breath hitched, and for a moment I thought it was him. But the sensation that crawled across my skin wasn't the same hunger-shadowed pull I felt whenever he was near. This was something else. Something darker. Before fear could root itself in my lungs, my door swung open, not violently, but fast enough to startle a gasp out of me. And he was there. His eyes were blazing with something harsh and feral, the glow unmistakably inhuman now. His face was tense, jaw set, posture rigid like he was holding back something monstrous. He swept into the room, shut the door behind him, and every candle in the hallway died at once. He wasn't breathing. That was when I realized he hadn't come to hurt me. He had come to protect me. Something had gotten inside the mansion, something that shouldn't have. He told me quietly, low, urgent, fierce, that I wasn't safe, that there were creatures out in the woods much older than him, that they had scented me, and that my fear was calling to them like blood. I felt ice crawl down my spine. Then he said something that stunned me. That he should have never brought me here, that he had put me in danger the moment he let me into his life, that he couldn't keep resisting the instinct to protect me. His voice broke when he said it. He looked at me then, haunted, furious, desperate, and I finally understood what he had been hiding all along. His restraint wasn't about control, it was about fear, fear of losing me, fear of wanting me too deeply, fear of what he would become if anything happened to me, fear of the monstrous truth inside him, and in that terrifying, fragile moment, the storm between us finally broke. He crossed the room in a single breathless movement, gathered me into his arms, and held me against him with a desperation so fierce it nearly shattered me. His body was cold, but his hold was fire. I felt his confession in the tremble of his hands and the shuddering breath he tried, and failed, to control. He cared for me, more than he should, more than he planned, more than was safe for either of us. And as he held me against his cold chest, I realized something that would change everything. I was already in love with him, completely, irrevocably, dangerously. And there was no turning back. He held me as though the darkness outside the window could rip me away from him if he loosened his grip even slightly. His cold hands trembled where they pressed against my back, and I could feel an ache in him, ancient, sharp, buried so deeply it seemed to vibrate through his bones. The room felt too still, too quiet, too fragile. He whispered, not aloud but in memory, the way I would later recall it, that something had crossed the edge of the property, something drawn to the scent of my fear, something that recognized I did not belong in this world of shadows and old curses. He told me this wasn't the first time he'd sensed it, just the closest, the boldest, the most dangerous. I felt the heaviness of his confession settle into my chest, but I didn't pull away. I should have been terrified. I was terrified, but his arms anchored me in a way nothing else ever had. It was the first time I felt safe and unsafe at the same time, a contradiction that defined everything between us. When he finally released me, he didn't step far. His cold fingers brushed my cheek again, the way they had the night we almost kissed, but now there was no hesitation, just conflict. A deep, painful struggle raging behind his eyes. He looked at me like he was memorizing my face, as though preparing himself for the possibility I wouldn't live until morning. And then, silently, without a sound or visible movement, he vanished. Not walked away, not slipped out the door. Vanished, dissolving into shadows that bent around him like they knew his name. My breath caught. My heart stuttered. I finally understood. He wasn't human, and he never had been. The candles flickered violently as I stood alone in the cold room. The mansion seemed to breathe around me, expanding and contracting with every gust of winter wind. I wrapped my arms around myself, listening to the silence, listening for him, listening for whatever had trespassed onto the grounds. Minutes blurred, maybe hours. Time lost its shape in fear. Then, somewhere deep in the forest outside, I heard something, a sound that didn't belong in any world I knew. Low, guttural, hungry. It made my entire body lock up. I stumbled back toward the bed, my breath coming too fast, my pulse hammering so loudly I worried the thing outside might hear it. I didn't know what I was waiting for, him, or the creature, or sunrise, but I knew I couldn't leave the room. And then, a scream tore through the night, not a human scream, not even close. I covered my mouth, tears burning my eyes. My legs trembled beneath me, but I forced myself to stay standing. Whatever was happening outside was violent, vicious, and real. I imagined him out there, cold, controlled, deadly, fighting something older and darker than anything I'd ever feared. Minutes dragged like hours. The sounds grew farther away. The forest fell silent again. When the door finally opened, I didn't breathe. He stepped inside, drenched in shadows and snow, his hair windswept, his clothing torn in places that showed faint, silver scars forming as I watched. His eyes were glowing, a fierce, unnatural brightness that made the room colder. He looked otherworldly, inhuman, predatory, terrifying, and heartbreakingly beautiful. He shut the door behind him with unnatural quiet. I whispered, internally, as memory, that I wanted to know what he was, what danger I was in, why he had brought me here, why he had saved me. He didn't speak. He simply crossed the room and stopped in front of me, close enough that I felt the cold radiating from his skin. He lifted my chin gently, forcing me to meet his eyes. His fingers were trembling. Then he exhaled a confession. Not spoken aloud, not in dialogue, but etched in my memory forever, that he was a vampire, that he had lived for centuries, that he fed on blood, that he existed in darkness, that desire, for him, was dangerous, that my heartbeat tempted him more than anything he had ever known, that the one thing he wanted most was the one thing he feared taking, me. My entire world tilted, but I didn't step away. Instead, I lifted my hand and touched his cold cheek. He closed his eyes at the contact, like the simple gesture hurt him. When he opened them again, he looked undone, like a man who had spent lifetimes suppressing emotion and had finally failed. And in that moment, in the breathless space between fear and longing, we stopped resisting. He leaned in, slowly, painfully, as though fighting every instinct inside him. And this time he didn't pull away. His lips met mine, cold and hungry, deep and aching, gentle and desperate all at once. The kiss broke something open inside me, something tender, something fierce, something that had been waiting since the night in the hallway. He kissed me like he had wanted to for weeks, like he had tried to deny himself, like he feared I would slip away if he didn't hold on. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, breathing like he had run miles, even though he didn't need breath at all. He whispered in memory that he shouldn't have done it, that it was dangerous, that I was fragile, that he wasn't made for softness or warmth or human love. But the way his voice shook told me the truth. He wanted me. He cared for me. He wouldn't let me go now. Not ever. And I knew it then. I wasn't leaving him, even if I should, even if danger circled us in the dark, even if the world outside the mansion wanted me dead. I was already his, and he was already mine. The days that followed were charged, electric, breathless, impossible. Every touch lingered a second too long. Every glance felt like a promise or a warning. Every room we stepped into together felt warmer despite his cold skin. He hired me officially to work in the mansion, though we both understood it wasn't really work he wanted. It was me, close, near, safe. He insisted I sleep in a different bedroom, but he always hovered near, always watching without admitting he was. And the tension nearly consumed us both. It grew unbearable in the quietest moments. When I folded linens, when he passed behind me in the hallway, when his fingers brushed mine by accident, when I felt the weight of his gaze on the back of my neck. I waited for him to kiss me again. He waited for me to break first. Neither of us did. Weeks passed like this, each one thick with longing and unsaid confessions, the kind of slow burn heat that makes the heart race but never offers relief. Until the night everything changed. The night our love stopped being forbidden tension and became something real, dangerous, consuming. The night that led me to fall so deeply that losing him would nearly kill me. And eventually, the night that turned me into what he was. The night that gave us a family. But everything that happened next began with a single, irreversible moment. The moment I nearly lost my life. Everything changed on a night that was supposed to be quiet. He had gone out briefly, to hunt, though he never called it that in words. He simply told me, in the measured tone I learned to read too well, that he needed to step out and would be back before midnight. I had gotten used to his absences, short and always followed by a lingering coldness in the air that clung to him when he returned. But something about that night felt different from the beginning. The mansion was too still, the air too tight, the shadows too attentive. I tried distracting myself, polishing silver in the dining room, reorganizing books in the library, folding sheets in one of the endless linen closets, but the unease clung to me. I kept glancing toward the windows, toward the door, toward the staircase, expecting him to appear. He didn't. Midnight came and went. A little after 1, I heard it. A crackling sound at the edge of the forest. A rustle that felt too intentional. A whisper of something hungry moving toward the house. My heart raced. I froze, listening, trying to decide if it was him or something else. Something that had followed the scent of the blood he fought so hard to avoid taking from me. Something that remembered my fear from that night weeks earlier. When the sound came again, louder this time, I realized it wasn't him. He didn't stumble. He didn't break branches. He didn't move like he carried weight. Whatever approached was heavier, clumsier, less controlled, less human. I stepped back, but it was too late. The dining room window shattered in a single violent explosion of glass, and before I could scream, something slammed into me. Something huge, something snarling, something with claws instead of hands and eyes that gleamed with a hunger I couldn't even comprehend. I hit the floor so hard the air flew from my lungs. Pain exploded across my ribs. Instinct took over. I pushed, kicked, scrambled, but the creature was too strong. Its breath was hot and rancid against my face as it leaned over me, pinning me down. I felt its claws tear into my arm, slicing deep. I felt my blood spill warm across the cold marble. I felt myself slipping, in pain, in fear, in helplessness. Then, through the blur of blood and terror, I heard a sound that froze the world. A snarl. But not from the creature on top of me. From him. He appeared out of nowhere, moving too fast to be seen, too furious to be restrained. He collided with the monster in an explosion of shadows and broken glass, ripping it away from me with a force that shook the ground. The creature shrieked, a sound I'll never forget, and they crashed against the far wall in a violent blur of claws and teeth. I tried to sit up, but collapsed. The room spun wildly. My vision darkened at the edges. Through the haze, I watched him fight, a blur of inhuman strength and cold fury, a creature of myth battling something even older. He tore into the monster with a rage I had never seen in him, a terrifying, consuming rage fueled by something more potent than bloodlust. Fear. Fear of losing me. I heard him growl my name, not spoken but remembered, as though the sound itself kept him breathing. The fight ended in seconds. The creature's body fell to the ground with a sickening thud, and he turned to me so fast the air cracked around him. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands shaking violently as he pulled me into his arms. I felt his cold fingers press against my wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. His eyes glowed bright silver, terrified, frantic, shattered. That was when I realized vampires didn't cry. But if they could have, he would have been sobbing. He whispered my name again in memory, broken, pleading, as though saying it could anchor me to the world. My vision blurred, my pulse slowed. I felt myself slipping. The world dimmed. His voice grew distant. I remember him saying that I had to stay awake, that I had to hold on, that he couldn't lose me, that he had lived too long in darkness to have found his one sliver of light only to watch it die. I remember feeling his cold breath against my cheek as he pressed his forehead to mine. I remember the ache in his voice, a centuries-old ache cracking open for me. I remember his confession, that he loved me, that he had tried not to, that he had failed. And then I felt his teeth on my neck, sharp, cold, gentle in a way that didn't make sense. He bit me like he was terrified of hurting me, even though he already had no choice. My world exploded into cold fire. My body arched, my breath ripped from my lungs, my heart convulsed in agony and ecstasy at the same time. Every nerve lit up, every bone trembled, every drop of remaining life in me surged toward him as he drew it out, only enough to pull me over the threshold, only enough to save me. And then I felt his wrist against my lips, cold skin, hot blood, a taste like lightning, like winter storms, like grief and eternity and love. He whispered in memory that he was sorry, that he didn't want this for me, but he couldn't live without me. Not now, not after loving me, not after almost losing me. I drank. The world shattered into fragments of darkness. Then everything went silent. I don't know how long I was gone, but when I opened my eyes again, the world looked different, sharper, deeper, brighter and darker all at once. And he was there, kneeling beside the bed where he must have placed me, eyes fixed on mine with a hope so fragile it could have broken at a whisper. I felt the cold in my veins, the stillness in my chest, the haunting quiet of my own heartbeat gone. I knew what I was, a vampire, his vampire. But the first thought I had wasn't fear, it was him. His face softened when he realized I recognized him. A trembling breath escaped him, and for the first time since I'd met him, he truly looked alive. He pulled me into his arms, not with the restraint of before, but with the full, desperate force of someone who had watched me die and brought me back with his own hands. Our lips met again, and this time, nothing stopped us. No fear, no restraint, no danger. Just two creatures bound in darkness and love, finding warmth in each other's cold. The years that followed were a blur of passion and healing. I learned to control the change. He taught me how to sense danger, how to hunt, how to exist in the world he had once endured alone. We built a life inside the mansion, a life filled with quiet nights, stolen kisses, whispered confessions, and the kind of love that burned slow and eternal. And then, the impossible happened. We discovered I could carry life, half human, half vampire life, a rare miracle of blood and fate. Our children came into the world in ways that defied every rule of nature, heartbeats that echoed in the walls before bodies ever formed, eyes glowing before they ever saw light, little hands cold but strong. They became our purpose, our joy, our proof that monsters could love so deeply it rewrote their curses. 7 years passed, 7 Christmases we spent together, never alone, never cold, never grieving the past. And now, when I sit beside the fire, watching our children play among shadows that no longer frighten me, feeling his hand slip into mine with the familiarity of eternity, I no longer see the lonely girl eating cheap food in a crumbling apartment. I see a woman who died and was reborn into a love fierce enough to change the nature of monsters. A woman with a family, a home, a life stronger than darkness. A woman who will never spend another Christmas alone. Because I found him, and he found me. And love, in all its terrifying, impossible power, saved us both. I woke the next evening with a strange ache inside my chest. Not pain, but anticipation, the kind that curls through every vein like warm smoke. Living in that mansion had changed the rhythm of my days so completely that sometimes I barely recognized myself. The girl who scrubbed floors in a dingy diner felt like someone I had known in another lifetime. And yet, I hadn't fully understood what I was becoming, or what it meant to belong to a creature like him. The mansion felt different that night, calmer, quieter, as if the walls themselves knew something important was about to happen. I found myself wandering through its long halls, fingers brushing against carved wood and centuries-old tapestries. Everything he owned felt timeless, and it made me wonder how long he had lived before me, how many lifetimes he'd witnessed rise and fall like passing seasons. When I reached the music room, I froze. He wasn't supposed to be home yet, but I heard the soft, low hum of a melody drifting from inside. I pushed the door open gently, and there he was, sitting at the grand piano, the entire room bathed in silver light leaking through tall windows. He wasn't playing with his hands. Instead, he sat still, eyes closed, and the keys moved on their own under invisible pressure. Magic. His magic. He told me before that older vampires could manipulate objects easily, but I'd never actually seen him use that power so casually. I stayed hidden for a moment, leaning against the doorway, watching him. There was something mesmerizing about seeing him like that. Not the imposing, controlled version of him I had first met, but a quieter, more vulnerable echo of who he used to be before immortality hardened him. He noticed me eventually. He didn't look surprised. He told me he sensed me long before I entered the room, that my presence was like a subtle warmth he felt even through closed doors. He said it softly, almost gently, and I felt a shiver run through me. I wondered if that connection was because he had turned me, if maybe some piece of his essence now lived inside me, linking us like invisible threads. He patted the bench beside him, and I joined him. The piano keys stilled instantly. I felt tempted to ask him to play something, but instead I found myself saying something else entirely, something I hadn't meant to say aloud. I told him I was scared, not of him, I clarified, but of the future, of what I was becoming, of how easily I now killed without hesitation, of how natural it felt to crave things no human should ever crave. I admitted that some nights, when I heard my heartbeat slow into near silence, I wondered if I had lost myself somewhere between life and death. He didn't interrupt me. He listened the way someone listens to an echo they've waited centuries to hear, patient, and with an emotion I had come to recognize as one of the last pieces of his humanity. He told me that fear was normal, that every new vampire went through a period of mourning, not for their old life, but for the version of themselves they could never return to. He told me the important part wasn't what I had lost, but who I was choosing to become now. And then he said something I didn't expect. He told me I was the only one he had ever turned out of love. My chest tightened. I didn't know how to respond. He said it with such raw honesty that for a moment, I forgot the fear, forgot the doubts, forgot everything except the way he looked at me, like I was the first sunrise he'd seen in centuries, even though neither of us would ever see sunlight again. He stood, reached out his hand, and told me he needed to show me something. I followed him through corridors I had never explored, deeper into the mansion than I'd ever gone. We eventually reached a tall iron door. He pressed his palm against it, and the locks clicked open in a sequence that sounded like tumbling chains. When the door swung open, I gasped. Inside was a massive underground garden, a greenhouse preserved with magic. Moonlight poured through enchanted glass overhead, illuminating flowers that shouldn't exist anymore. Some glowed faintly, others pulsed with soft bioluminescence. A small river ran through the center, reflecting shimmering silver patterns across the leaves. He told me this was where he planted memories, that every flower here represented someone he once loved, humans who had grown old and died, friends lost to time, even family long forgotten by the world. He admitted he used to come here on Christmas when he still believed holidays mattered, but over the years, the garden had become too painful for him, a reminder of how alone immortality could feel. And then he said he brought me here because he wanted me to plant something, too. A memory of my family. I cried before I could stop myself. The grief I had buried deep in my chest, the loss, the guilt, the emptiness, came pouring out all at once. I told him everything I had never dared say aloud, how I carried the weight of their deaths like a shadow across my life, how Christmas had become a wound instead of a celebration, how some nights I still woke up expecting my mother to be calling me for dinner or my brother to be playing video games down the hall. He didn't comfort me with words. He simply held me as I shook, and for the first time since the accident, I let myself mourn without restraint. When my tears finally slowed, he placed one of the glowing seeds into my hand and helped me kneel near the river. I pressed the seed into the earth, whispered their names in my mind, and watched as the soil stirred softly. A small light sprouted, unfolding into a pale blue flower that swayed as if touched by a non-existent breeze. I felt something lift inside me. Not the grief, not completely, but the crushing heaviness that made it impossible to breathe. It was still there, but it no longer suffocated me. He helped me stand, and I wrapped my arms around him without thinking. He held me tightly, and in that moment, the garden didn't feel like a graveyard of memories anymore. It felt like a bridge between our past and whatever future we were building. Later, as we walked back upstairs, he told me he had a surprise waiting in the music room. When we arrived, I saw a small box on the piano bench. I opened it carefully, and inside was a necklace, a silver chain with a deep crimson stone at the center. It glimmered like a drop of frozen blood. He told me it was a protective charm, ancient, powerful, and bound to him. If I wore it, no vampire could harm me, not even by accident. And if I ever needed him, even across continents, the stone would warm and he would come for me instantly. He told me he wanted me to have it because I was his mate. The word sent a jolt through me. Mate. Permanent, eternal, unbreakable. He explained that vampire bonds weren't the way humans thought of relationships. They weren't chosen lightly or out of convenience. They were rare, so rare that most vampires never found someone whose soul aligned with theirs deeply enough to create that bond. He said he had spent centuries believing he was incapable of feeling it at all. And then I came along, fragile, lonely, furious at the world, and still somehow brave enough to follow him home that night. He said he felt the first spark of the bond the moment I stepped into his mansion, trembling with fear but determined to survive. I didn't know if I was ready to say the word out loud, but I knew how I felt. I knew that the thought of eternity didn't scare me if he was in it. I knew that the mansion no longer felt like a prison. It felt like home. I knew that I loved him enough to feel terrified of losing him. I told him that, quietly, honestly, and his expression softened in a way I had never seen before. He leaned in then, and even though we had kissed many times before, this kiss felt different, deeper, slower, as if sealing something ancient and sacred between us. His hands cradled my face with surprising gentleness, and I felt the bond settle inside me like a second heartbeat. The rest of that night blurred into warmth, whispered confessions, and the kind of closeness that made the whole world slip away. And when morning finally crept in, the morning neither of us would ever see again. I realized something. For the first time in years, Christmas didn't feel lonely. For the first time in forever, I felt like I belonged to someone, and they belonged to me. For the first time in my entire life, I felt whole.